Okay, let's see if everything's working here. Looks like it. So far, so good.
Don't forget the other one.
Check one more place. So, okay.
Where are you right now, Adam?
You're live,
I'm
just
up
so you
in
know.
Lyons.
Okay.
Oh, hi. I'm up in Lyons, Colorado.
Oh, nice. Yeah, we just
Yeah.
had a little event in Colorado. We were there for a few weeks, a couple weeks.
A little event.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Is that what we're calling it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually heard about your event and really wanted to come up and have a chance to meet you guys in person, but my travel schedule is pretty full on these days. So sorry I didn't make it.
No
Hope you
worries.
guys had a
Next
good
time.
We'll be back.
You were probably at contact in the desert very soon before that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about that. Are you ready, Darren?
Yeah, man, we good.
Okay, we got to start up the other.
I'm ready. You ready?
Yep.
Okay, here we go.
All right, we've got Adam Apollo with us now. How do I describe this man? Wizard, musician, astral traveler, scientist, researcher. I think I'd rather just hear it from him. So, welcome to the show, Adam.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think we should probably you should probably describe yourself a little bit. I don't want to get too detailed in the bio because there's a lot to say. I mean, you're still young. I mean, the amount of experience you've had and the amount of stuff you've done, it's one of those things I'm just mind blown. Like, how does he do so much?
I appreciate that. I mean, you can't really see the fuzzy, squiggly gray hair sticking out of the back here, but I guess I'm young relatively, but for me, life got jump started pretty early on. I woke up when I was about 15 and realized I had an energy body that was capable of being manipulated by my consciousness, and having some very profound experiences at that age caused me to deep dive into the nature of reality, of physics. I just got an insatiable desire to explore the universe and unpack everything I possibly could. And originally I had a plan to have a book out of all of that work by the time I was, 19 or 20, as I did my first big, physics presentation on unified field theory. And for me, it was specifically the unification of science and spirituality through unified field theoretics as my senior project in high school.
Nice.
And then found myself sort of following a path of redefining and transforming education. And that led me to have an opportunity to meet some amazing people. And then I started speaking at different events, leading up to the International Symposium on Digital Earth, where I was a keynote speaker at their gala to a bunch of, Google and satellite agencies and all these people. And then from that, got invited to be a speaker at the White House and United Nations. And this was all, still in my early 20s. And so that kind of all that work, really jump started my ability to really integrate the different pieces of the puzzle, as I call it, of how we can transform as a human species and transform this planet. And couldn't get me off the train of purpose, so to speak.
No kidding. Geez, I didn't hit that train until I was like mid-30s.
I'm not even sure if I'm there yet.
Well, don't worry, that train does stop periodically. Yeah. And there's plenty of stations.
Lots more people on.
So,
no worries, Darren.
So what? When did you get involved with the Resonance Foundation and along that journey?
Yeah, well, I'd obviously been deep diving in physics since I was a teenager, and had pretty much assembled my sense of a unified field theory with basic geometric descriptions of space-time and how gravity forms, how equilibrium forms and allows the passage of electromagnetism through a state of equilateral tensegrity in the structure of space-time, and then also predicted geometries for what would cause spin and radiation to occur, and had pretty much found the roots of a lot of the forces by the time I was in my early 20s, and had a pretty clear description of those. And then at some point, I started coming across Nassim Harameyn's work, and just had heard his name for a while, started, checking out his papers on spin, which he, added torsion and spin equations to Einstein field theories, which I thought was great, a brilliant idea, very necessary, because obviously everything is spinning out there. And tracked his work for a while, although initially he knows this, but I initially thought that, he was missing some really, really critical stuff, but that he was on the right track. And over the years, we started kind of running into each other because we'd be speaking in the same places or conferences. And then I actually became very good friends with the mother of his children. And after that, we started actually really getting together and connecting and downloading with each other, exchanging sort of the deep mental structure of how we've been perceiving space-time and where the compatibilities were in our theories. And then all of that led to, at some point, through a contact that I had met at the White House, who was interested in my work in particular and wanted me to help her review Stephen Greer's work in order to decide whether or not she was going to fund Stephen Greer to build this new energy system.
Wow.
And I went to this meeting, we reviewed Stephen's work, and she asked me what I thought afterwards. And while I thought he did a great job and, he had some really good team, I was really concerned about the net of forces around him. And that I felt, honestly, that even if he built a new energy system, it wasn't going to go anywhere. And so I advised her not to fund him at that time, and she agreed, and she felt like that was not the best situation. But in the year following, she was planning to come to this event, Nexus Youth Summit at the United Nations, where I was speaking at. And I had been telling my contact who helped organize that event about Nassim and his progress, particularly with the Schwarzschild proton, in understanding, the structure of the proton itself and its nature, as pretty much the most permanent object in the universe. I don't know if you guys know this, but it takes, it would take 4 to 5 of the current lifetimes of the entire universe for a proton to decay. So there's something very powerful and special about this object. And I thought, Nassim has really been dedicated for a very, very long time. And I think he's on track to creating an energy system or to making a breakthrough in that area. And so last minute, called him, got him to come out to speak on a panel, went out to dinner with this woman. And 9 grueling months of dealing with lawyers later, I got the Resonance Project Foundation, as it was called at the time, funded for about $12 million.
Nice.
And so this enabled the facilities on Kauai to be developed. And I kind of came out of that window like stoked for him, and then going, how am I going to pay my rent this month? I'm like still building little websites for clients and scraping jobs here and there, doing the thing. And I had really established at this point a clear vision of what an integrative educational framework would look like and how to deliver that online through online systems. And so I ended up asking the president of the board, who is a friend of mine, Marshall Lefferts, who also just finished a book called Cosmometry. It's an amazing book, for a grant to do this. And he was like, well, I don't only want to give you a grant, like, let's join forces. Let's build this education system together. And I was like, well, if you want to do that, I would give the first version of this to the Resonance Foundation. And so that's what ended up happening. We ended up building the Resonance Academy together. And because of my work in unified physics, I wrote a good deal of that first course, especially the deep dives into physics, modern physics, and translating a lot of Nassim's work into the unified physics teaching modules.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's great. So that was the whole genesis of that that educational part of the Resonance Foundation then, I guess, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I saw Nassim about I think it was about 4 or 5 years now, 5 years. I think it was just when the Hawaii thing was starting, I think. I don't know the full timing of it and all that, but now thinking
Yeah.
back on how long ago that was now, like so much has happened since then. And yeah, that's incredible.
Did we have
Incredible
Marshall on
story.
last week?
We talked to Marshall last week. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His book is amazing. I
Yeah.
just got the copy of it. And it's like this thick, tons of full color
Oh.
pictures. And it's a super deep dive.
Yeah.
Marshall's brilliant. And
Yeah, what a guy too. What a great guy. And I can't wait to get that book in the studio. It's gonna be one of those ones we're always like probably gonna be referencing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I figured you guys knew each other, but I didn't know that you were that close. That's fantastic.
Yeah, we've all had a deep weave for a long time, and it's interesting how at different times in our lives we it's important for people to really get behind the work of someone who's really having breakthroughs.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a circuit of that where you got to back people when they're really rocking it, and a lot of us really backed Nassim when he was making his big breakthroughs.
Yeah.
And he still is making big breakthroughs. And it's also important, I think, as researchers and as scientists and as people who are all stakeholders in thinking that has the power to really change the world, that we all support each other. Because I also feel like in the community, and I've seen this a lot in the disclosure community, you guys have probably seen it as well, where there's kind of just a lot of backstabbing and infighting and people talking junk about each other. And, I think at the heart, whether you're right or wrong, I think we all are still on the mission with the same intention of really bringing the truth to this planet and to, making an equitable, peaceful, and thriving world for all of our children.
Yeah. Yeah, it must have been great for you to meet also a bunch of like-minded people at the Resonance Foundation. I mean, I know a friend of ours also, like a big shift in his life was going to a meeting about the Resonance Foundation and meeting a whole bunch of great people and his whole life just shifted at that point. So yeah, that's
well, I can tell you, just going to Egypt together and going to Peru together, getting the students actually coming on these missions where we deep dive in these intense sites, and you're all underground in the Serapeum, and you're looking at 30 different chambers, and inside of each one of these chambers you've got these massive sarcophagi, supposedly these tombs that are 30 feet long, 6 or 7 feet high and 8 feet wide, and they're 1.5 feet thick, and they're made of basalt, 9.5 on the hardness scale. They're laser sharp. The corners are almost sharp enough to cut your finger still, and they weigh 70 tons to 100 tons each. And the archaeological story is, yep, they put them down there as tombs for bulls.
Yeah.
And you're just like, that's bush, come on, this, there's so much amazing stuff going on the planet. And when you see these things, with people, with students, who just, everybody grew up with the same kind of stories coming out of school. But when you actually go to these sites and you actually start questioning the physics of how some of these things came together, it's just astounding. And it's so inspiring to think about the height of civilization prior to the end of the last ice age.
Yep. Global as well.
Do you think it was just then, or how far back do you think that goes?
Well, I mean, I think that's the last kind of juncture we can tell a major cataclysm happened, and we can really see the evidence of the breaking that happened at that time.
At the Younger Dryas,
Yeah, just from the flood, the evidence of the flood itself.
Yeah.
But, a lot of these sites in Peru, for example, when you look at the terracing on the mountains, you've got terraces that go from the bottom of the valleys all the way up to the tops of the Andes. And, you wouldn't hike up this mountain to go and pick some radishes. You know what I mean? This is 5,000 to 10,000 feet verticals, insane. And you're just thinking like, well, how would they even deliver stuff from the tops of these mountains to the bottoms? And you start looking at it like, wow, this entire country, like this whole area, as you're traveling for, hours and hours and hours, days, even across the country, you're seeing these same structures going all the way from the bases to the tops of the mountains. And it just starts to give you this sense of that this was a massive breadbasket for a civilization that was so huge. Like, we don't even have records of it at that size. We know the Incas had a large scale civilization, but you can tell what the Incas built. And it's all the lower terraces, and they look new and they look pretty nice, But these old terrace lines, they just go on and on and on and on, and they crisscross the entire country. In fact, a lot of South America has
Yeah. Huh.
That's probably the same sort of stuff we were looking at in the from the Pueblo people down in Colorado.
them.
It's that same sort of idea where you've got the Mesa Verde. The people are living way the fuck up on that mountain. There's no way they're getting water and stuff up there. So it's like, what did they have in place that was
Bringing thousands of logs and hundreds of thousands of stones up there to build those things.
They brought those logs 90 miles or some shit. Anyway,
Yeah.
let's jump back to physics. You had said you had done a lot of the work on that course on the physics. I was wondering if you could give us sort of just a quick rundown of a reminder, so to speak, of where the unified field theory kind of differs from relativity.
Yeah, well, it's not, I wouldn't say it's really that distinct from relativity. If you look at the trajectory of physics, there's something very interesting that goes on where over the time, specifically from Rene Descartes until around Max Planck and Einstein, you have a basic philosophical structure. A lot of the early physicists, were known as philosophers. The basic philosophical structure is that there is this sort of underlying field, and this field we call the ether.
Yeah.
And the ether is broken down into these different kind of elemental components. And those elemental components we describe as fire, air, earth, and water. For example, is Western philosophy at its base, at its core. There's a lot of this that we see throughout history. And you get the sense that as things go along, the pressure of the church gets stronger and stronger and stronger, which forces the sort of alchemical studies and the studies involving consciousness and subjectivity and things like that to retreat further and further behind the scenes, while you push objectivity, mechanical sciences, even Descartes' statement, that basically only the human being has a soul, that no animals have souls, that every kind of animal or creature in there is automata. It can be understood as a compilation of its parts, like gears, right? And you see sort of the front end of science taking on this very mechanical, very separative kind of role where we're trying to break down the universe into all of its little gears and components. While at the same time, you've got a lot of the brilliant thinkers like Newton hiding in their caves in the background, that they're actually alchemists, and they're actually studying these sort of universal principles and geometries and structures that may interconnect all of these ideas together. But out of fear of being persecuted by the church, they don't surface any of those ideas. And so you've got this kind of hacking away of the components of this ether, or this sort of what was already somewhat of a unified picture of physics, in order to explain away the different components of it. So the study of fire becomes thermodynamics. The study of pressure systems, water and air, becomes hydrodynamics. The study of earth becomes geology and crystallography. And we start breaking away these different elementals. And then finally, the last bit to go, the last piece of the ether, was light itself. And they called it the luminiferous ether. And the luminiferous ether supposedly got initially kind of proved away by these guys called Michelson and Morley. This was around the turn of the 1900s. And they did a study with basically a table in a little office where they were trying to measure the force of the movement of the earth traveling through this supposed surrounding ether. and they didn't measure any pressure from the surrounding space affecting this table that's, of course, inside of an atmosphere spinning around the Earth at 1,000 miles an hour towards, as the Earth is hurtling through space. But because of their little experiment, they thought, well, we've definitively proved there is no ether, because they simply weren't accounting for the fact that all of the space and the air and the atmosphere is all moving with the surface of the Earth. So then you get Max Planck coming in, and he starts looking at quantizing the electromagnetic field. And around the same time, you have Einstein come in, and Einstein names this sort of quanta of light, the littlest, tiniest bit of light, as a photon. And he does this paper on special relativity. And this paper on special relativity basically describes how we perceive light and how light actually works in the universe, and how light is related to time and perception, and how light speed is something that is based on the observer, right? And this paper was super groundbreaking. And for the scientific community, it was also a really great way of saying, finally, we don't need this luminiferous ether to describe anything anymore. We just use Einstein's work and we've gotten rid of it. Voila, like done deal. Yes, it's the age of quantum mechanics now. But unfortunately, or fortunately, as it may be, 10 years later, Einstein publishes a paper on general relativity. And the paper on general relativity says that light is affected by the structure of space-time. That in fact, the bending of space-time itself can curve light. And because of this, his teacher Lorentz comes up to Einstein and he says, hey, Einstein, you just proved the ether exists. You know this, right? And Einstein's like, oh, you're right. I did. I have to do something about this. So Einstein does this whole paper on general relativity and the ether. And he does a press conference on it, speaks about it, does all this stuff, but everybody ignores it. Nobody wants to hear it. Everybody's excited about the quantum mechanical world and, these German guys that are now coming out with stuff, Bohr and Heisenberg, and like all of these kind of crazy new ideas coming out in physics. And everybody ignores Einstein's theory on the ether, that general relativity actually requires an underlying ether. And even when we finally, did the basic experiments to measure how much energy is in empty space in the vacuum itself, and we did these plate experiments where, you're trying to detect how much force is there, even when we discovered there's so much force in the empty vacuum that it's 120 orders of magnitude different from what we think of as empty space, we just threw it out the window. It's called the vacuum catastrophe. And it's one of the biggest faux pas in physics, for in the past 100 years. And it like literally shows that physics is really screwed up. And not only that, but then you have Heisenberg's interpretation of quantum mechanics and the uncertainty principle, which Schrodinger, Schrodinger, which we all familiar with Schrodinger's cat, right? Like this cat in a box, and the cat's in the box, and Schrodinger comes up with this idea that, well, if everything's uncertain and it's either a particle or a wave until you perceive it, then if you put a cat in a box and then we don't know which way it's going to measure, is the cat alive and dead at the same time? And Heisenberg's like, yep. And Schrodinger's like, you're insane. And Einstein thought he was insane too. And yet we still use that as the example of how quantum mechanics works. But it's missing this very, very, very fundamental principle, which is that if space-time is a vibrating, highly energetic medium, if you have a node vibrating in a superfluid, highly energetic field like that, it's going to be both a point of vibration and it's also going to produce waves at the same time. And so you're going to have wave and particle at the same time. It doesn't matter which way you measure it. You can measure the position of the center of the vibration, or you can measure the angular momentum of the waves. But either way, you're still dealing with an underlying vibrating fluid. And the beautiful thing about this is that the more you start looking at this sort of classical interpretation of space-time, where space-time itself is a geometric lattice in a high state of tensegrity, just like Buckminster Fuller was talking about. It's all triangles. And you start looking at how that structure is moving in the shape of a proton, how that structure is moving in the field around electrons, how that structure is moving in gamma radiation and these different things. All of a sudden, you start seeing how all the different forces and the dynamics of things all arise in space-time from this fundamental field, which takes us back 600 years to the idea that everything's the ether and it's all just different geometric expressions of the ether. And we're finding now that in the height of our science and technology, that those ideas were actually correct, and that ancient cultures actually had a much better idea about what was going on in space-time than we give them credit for.
Yeah, which kind of gets back to the ancient mystery part of it that we were talking about, where I think they were utilizing some of this, and maybe not like high technology like the way we see it now, but they're tapping into it somehow with sound or vibrations or whatever. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did that get to your question?
Oh
there,
yeah,
Darren?
that was fantastic.
Yeah, it was good.
Answered. I mean,
Yeah.
very, very well articulated.
I like ether. What effect does the magnetic field from the sun over the solar system have on the ether? Does the magnetic field affect that at all? Like, is it different outside Earth or outside the solar systems, or?
Yeah, well, one way to look at it is that the entire solar system as a disk is one gigantic gravitational lens. This is the way I like to describe it. And that each planet has a certain sort of influence on the surrounding space around it. And that all of that surrounding space around each planet, in each of their positions, as well as the entire disk itself, is all space moving. So you can imagine the entire thing as a series of vortices in a fluid, and the whole thing is moving. It's not that you have a rock or a planet or a moon and it's pushing its way through space-time, because at that scale, we're not seeing any time dilation. We're not seeing any acceleration issues. The only acceleration that we're seeing from the standpoint of general relativity and Einstein's work is the acceleration in the new direction as the object is turning around the sun. But there's a stability to that, right? We should see if there was a friction between the planet and the surrounding space, we should see planets slowing down at some point, right? But we don't, because the whole flow of the space is moving. The field itself is fluid, and so the whole thing is moving and rotating. And because the field itself, the ether, so to speak, this underlying structure of space, is actually made of light at the Planck scale. It's actually vibrating light, which is literally nodes of singularities woven together in wormhole networks and entanglement structures. And that because it's made of light, electromagnetic radiation also doesn't have any friction passing through it. So you can think of the radiation from the sun or the radiation from the galaxy as it passes through this wave-like structure, fluid structure that is the whole solar system. It's not having to change form or slow down. It's just following whatever shape that space-time is in. So, for example, as it travels close to a planet, it gets bent slightly, right? If it goes right by a star, it gets bent even more. And if it goes right by a galaxy that's nearby, it could get bent to the point where you actually see galaxies behind other galaxies, gravitational lensing.
So it's more like a super fluidic whirlpool around the planet than the actual dent in the space-time like we used to show with the... So it's like we have to take that old model of the planet putting the sag into the fabric of space and start spinning that whole grid.
Exactly, right. And also break our idea that we're just it's useful to look at the gravitational divot in a two-dimensional structure.
That's right. So you got to take that grid and lay it on you got to lay that thing on top of itself a million fucking times and then start laying them this way as well. So it's almost more like a hard drive.
That's interesting. Tell me what you're seeing there when you're thinking of that.
Well, that's how I picture like a hard drive working. Like it's all broke up into those little fucking sectors or nodes. Or I mean, I don't know the techno babble for it, but it's basically split up into a bunch of little, however many little bits.
Yeah, electromagnetic switches,
And
right?
you can cram each bit with a 1 or a 0, and somehow that turns into this.
Yeah.
But I mean, when you start picturing space as a giant grid of nodes, then it just starts seeming. I mean, the whole thing seems holographic.
It's because you like simulation theory so much.
It's the only thing that makes sense.
Then it's obviously going to hard drive for you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we just spent last week talking about holographics.
It is a totally a holographic data field because, what we started to realize is that when you have quantum coherence, right, which is the phenomena that one area of space-time or the subatomic structures in one area of the space-time match those in another location in space-time, what we see is the phenomenon of entanglement, where when you change the spin, for example, of a subatomic particle, and then the other one changes at the same time, right? But what we realized is that experience of entanglement and the quantum coherence that exists there, that can be propagated anywhere. And in fact, all it is that when space-time in one area has the same basic geometry and vibration as that in another area, they effectively behave as if they're the same space.
Resonating. Yeah.
Well, that's because everything's entangled.
That's right. And then now if you apply that, let's say you apply that to the electromagnetic structure of an idea. So like if I have this idea in my head and it's in my brain, right? But there's an electromagnetic structure to it. And there's also a neuron structure that's being formed cellularly at a much larger scale around that idea, right? To store it kind of in the wetware of my body. That specific electromagnetic patterning that forms that idea is not necessarily isolated to my head.
Right.
So that means somebody else or somebody that I'm connected to could spontaneously, literally develop the same exact quantumly coherent idea pattern in their head.
Well, not only that, it seems to happen. It seems to happen.
It's finally
there's a million,
there's
a million examples. Well, probably not a million, but there's 100 examples in history of
100 monkeys.
Well, not only that, just like
the
different inventions happening on different parts of the globe at the same time, like literally within months of each other.
But I've never really I finally visualized how it would resonate, like how that entanglement could happen. Like if you created a thought that was exactly the same shape and spin, did you say? The same shape and vibration or spin as somebody else, it's going to resonate. Yeah.
That's why the 5G's here.
This not necessarily constrained by the spin, because spin is really just giving us compression and radiation, right? But think of it instead as like a bunch of nodes vibrating together, and they vibrate, and there's a color pattern in those nodes, right? Now you can kind of play this idea out in your head by thinking of like a song. When you listen to a song, that song is stimulating a certain kind of pattern of ideas and harmonics in your head and feelings and all the stuff that you have when you listen to that song. Well, why is it, do you think, that when there's a really, really epic blockbuster song released, that like all of these people feel it so deeply, and it builds and builds and builds as a crescendo until like the whole world goes crazy over it? I mean, you look at Michael Jackson as a phenomenon with some of his music, and there's these points where it's just like across every cultural barrier, people are feeling this resonance and this experience of this music, and it's connected to the experience that the person had who made that music and recorded that into the hard drive of the ether, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so this imprint of this particular vibrational field gets picked up by other people, and when they tune into that kind of same field, all of a sudden they feel connected. Yeah. They actually are connected to all the other people that listen to that same song.
Yeah. I wanted to expand on the spiritual part about it, because you've been looking at the overlap between science and spirituality for a long time now. So you've obviously put a lot of what you've learned into your spiritual practice, and for the longest time, but you really made me think about it there, where the importance of of not so much the mindfulness part, but the concentration part, or the focus part. Like just over the last few months or a year, because I always used to think of how powerful, like mindfulness was very powerful for me. Like just the being able to disconnect from your thoughts and just watch your thoughts and see where they go and how they start and all that. Like that was very powerful. But now I'm realizing that that might just be a tool to reach concentration, and that's where the power is in that focus or concentration. And like you said, if that idea becomes a structure with a oscillation or a vibration, maybe you can form that or increase the power or the size based on focus and concentration.
Well, that's why they put so much effort into keeping us distracted.
Yeah, well, you got that right. And you know, there's sort of the great they, right?
I mean, we're good at that ourselves. Let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly. We definitely work at doing that ourselves, and a lot of that is because, you know, when you start thinking of ideas as these sort of crystalline vibrational imprints, then you start realizing that depending on the geometry of the imprint, depending on its structure, it's going to actually filter light. And as it filters light, it's also filtering emotion. It's filtering what things you can now perceive new, right? So let's say you start building these sort of hard structures of thought based on what your parents taught you, based on what your church tells you, based on whatever, you know, was passed down through the society or culture that you live in. And now you've got these really specific ideas and lenses. And whenever there's an idea that tries to come in, you try to receive some new information from somebody or something, but let's say it's not compatible with that lens. Well, what happens is that lens literally stops that information from coming in and it blocks it out. And a lot of people kind of reach these sort of critical points in their lives where they are realizing like everything is creating this stress and this pressure against their whole internal idea of reality and their whole belief system. And sometimes people actually have breakdowns. You know, some of my students and some clients I've had over time, you know, actually have these breakdowns where they don't know how to accept the new ideas and experiences that are coming to them in their lives, because the lenses that they built in the past are so fixed, they're so strong, and they're filtering out so much of good experience in their lives. But when you actually go back to the root, you know, you deal with the original trauma, you deal with, you know, the pain and the fear that caused that belief system to form in the first place. Now you're given an opportunity to actually break down those original lenses. And as you do that, you know, there's oftentimes a lot of things stacked on top of that original belief that are all going to fall down. But if you let it happen and you let all those things that you thought were real fall down and fall apart, you might feel like you're kind of in a chrysalis, you know, and your entire body, as you know, a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, you know, you've got your entire body is melted down into goop. But you've got these imaginal cells, and they're the ones that are holding the keys of the truth that you know you want to experience, the future self that you're going to have. And those imaginal cells are just going to completely hold the field for you until finally you form this butterfly that is this new self that's able to accept more information, including the information that you now, you know, see was limiting you. But you can also accept all kinds of information that's contrary to that. And that allows you to actually perceive more clearly what the truth is. Because, you know, if the universe and all truth is, if it's all just light and geometry, then what really counts is being able to see it from enough different facets of the crystal to actually know what it actually is.
If it's all light and geometry, then all that matters is love.
There you go, man. Cheers to that.
He's talked about it before. That's one of the keys.
I mean,
love.
Honestly, because if it's just that, I mean, then you're obviously on a hard drive, so you might as well make the best of it. Quit your job because it doesn't matter. What did John McAfee say? You'll be fucking smart enough to get a new job before you starve.
Yeah.
There you go.
Don't quit your job because I told you to. Support the show.
Well, a job can be, a lot of people get jobs based on a specific mental pattern passed to them by their parents. Like, you got to do this, you have to work, you got to make this money, and they don't know how to get creative enough to be doing what they love. So what's the answer? You go and you work at McDonald's or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And at some point you're like, what the frick am I doing? What is this? Is this the life that I really wanted for myself? Where is my creativity? Where do I get to really be me? And a lot of people, go into drugs and alcohol and really kind of lose themselves in, and try to kind of numb themselves outside of that world, because they're in a circuit and they feel trapped inside of this cage of life. And let me tell you right now, that cage is just an idea. That's all it is. It's literally just a way of thinking. It's like thinking the earth is flat and you're trapped. You're stuck on the earth. There's a giant ice wall. Oh my God. Everybody's lying to you. Oh my God. All of NASA is like, it's a huge conspiracy. There's a level of fear feedback that can occur from ideas like that literally begin to isolate you and create a cage around yourself and your mind. Now, I had the sad experience of watching a couple people that I actually really care about and love a lot get caught up in the flat earth thing because someone they highly respected got behind it really strongly. And, it's a tough thing to have to just be like, have you ever had a flight in the Southern Hemisphere before? Are the flight times 4 times longer than they are in the Northern Hemisphere? No, I'm sorry, they're not. Have you ever looked at a planet through a telescope? Have you ever studied the size of the Earth and the size of the sun and the distance between them and how these things work? Like, it's just some very, very simple sort of observational understandings that can break down that whole theory. But if you lack the desire to really question and look at your reality in a new way, then it's pretty easy to get swept up in things like that.
Yeah.
I can hear the
My apologies,
keyboards
Benny,
clicking and clacking right now. They're coming. You need to use your adult brain a little more, Mr. Apollo. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't mean that. That's what I got told when we had the flat earth.
Oh, we did the flat earth nap, and Darren actually got a little upset, and it was really funny.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I got triggered.
Yeah, Darren got triggered pretty good. Yeah,
it's okay, but if you're out there right now and you're experiencing a wave of fear and anxiety based on what I'm saying right now,
just breathe through it.
I'd just like you to look at that, because that's that in itself.
Adam's not making you feel that way. You're making yourself feel that way. So take a look at that, explore it, feel through it, take a deep breath,
break
close
down
your
those
eyes,
lenses and open up.
break down the lenses.
I will give you one other piece here that I think is critical, and then let's please move on.
Yeah.
If the Earth is not a sphere, then there's no gravitational core to the Earth. And
Nobody's
if there's no
proved gravity.
gravitational core to the Earth, then there's no way to ground. There's actually no way that you can ground your being into the nexus at the heart of the Earth, which connects to the nexus at the heart of the sun, the heart of the galaxy, the heart of the galactic cluster we call Laniakea, the heart of its superclusters, the heart of the universe. Like, literally grounding into source, grounding into the infinite, requires nothing more than relaxing into the gravitational field of your own planet, which is taking care of you. And if you don't believe there's a center of the Earth, well,
is it hollow?
Like removing the ground current in a big house with a lot of electricity running through it.
Is it hollow?
Yeah.
Is the Earth hollow?
Is the Earth hollow? I would say absolutely not.
No, not even a little bit at the middle?
Well, if you look at density, compression, and gravitational structures, you recognize that, in any large, dense object, there's sort of a crystallization and compressioning structure that occurs as you go to the center of that object. And, you can see this with any large mass, right? Now, I'm not saying there's not massive hollow spaces in the crust of the Earth.
Yeah.
For sure there are. I mean, we know there's gargantuan oceans underground. I've seen ships fly in and out of Mount Adams and Mount Shasta. I've watched them go into the surface and bloop, like into the freaking gate. But, when you go down far enough, it gets pretty freaking hot, and you keep going, and it's going to get hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and more compact. And we know this because there's literally an engine being generated by the force of the heavier metals moving under the ground in the magma that are generating the Earth's electromagnetic fields. And if you went all the way down to the core of the Earth, you're going to get to the inner core, which is basically a giant iron crystal. And at the center of that, you're going to reach a point where the protons are in so much coherence that you're actually going to see a singularity. And I think Nassim is right on with the idea that there's a black hole at the center of every proton, as well as every large gravitational structure, the Earth, the sun, the galaxy.
That's creating matter and causing the planets to grow.
Well, potentially, yes. I mean, how much it's growing, how much matter is being exchanged in that process, I think is still up for debate. But whether or not, space-time itself organizes it. Space-time obviously organizes itself around singularities. I mean, everything that we know is organized around a galaxy, and what's at the center of the galaxy? A freaking black hole. It just happens to be a supermassive black hole, and so why would all the gas rotate around a sun? Why would a sun even form? A sun is going to form because space-time is swirling around some center. And that center aggregating gas is what we call a singularity.
The sun's almost like the opposite of the singularity. It's like that's where the shit's pumping out the other side. I forget what I was going to say.
Well, the whole translation of a black hole, as in removing matter from space, is I think a little bit incorrect, and that's why people like Hawking have had such a hard time figuring out the firewall problems and all of that with losing matter and information into a black hole.
Yeah.
What about, so isn't that iron crystal at the center of the Earth just mostly empty space, though?
Well, I mean, again, that's just getting down to the nature of space-time itself. So would those be like more tightly compacted grids? Is that how that would work? Is that like taking the grid we were looking at before and just cramming it together so tight that you can't see the spaces? Yeah, like imagine if you have protons spinning at the speed of light, and usually they have pressure off of each other because of their shared Planck fields that are spinning, creating the electron field. That's what we normally call like a molecular structure. But it gets to the point where the protons literally start all getting compacted into like one single giant nucleus. That's kind of what we're talking about. The compactification of protons into a grid where they're almost behaving as a single nucleus. And at a certain level of coherency in that nucleus, you could think of all of their gravitational points aligning in a core, and that core extending itself as literally a singularity. Now, it doesn't have to be that big. It can be very small, but the amount of force that level of coherence creates, is then also magnified and magnified and magnified by all the co-moving protons that are in a lattice structure extending out from it. Because when you deal with an iron crystal or a metal crystal, you've got every single atom in that structure aligned in precision to each other, and they don't have to even vibrate that much, and also the whole structure is rotating and spinning too. So you've got this like super hot spinning crystal of Plancks vibrating together and forming this incredible field.
Yeah, I got a bunch of.
How does that go? So does that if you keep compacting that grid and compacting that grid and compacting that grid, is that eventually what causes supernovas?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting concept. So we have some clear ideas about why supernovas form when a sun explodes, for example, right? And a lot of that is simply because in the center of a sun, you have this process of literally merging the atomic nuclei of atoms together, just like what we're talking about, where they get compactified to a point where they get in such high coherence that the protons actually merge. Hydrogen becomes helium. Helium then becomes, heavier objects and processes, and then noble gases. And eventually, you start getting metal production and carbon production. And as you start getting into these higher levels of coherence and crystalline structure, now what happens is there's sort of like an expense account where like the lower structured gases keep moving in through this field and joining in and joining in and joining in, and it gets to a point where there's a pressure compaction issue between the pressure in each of the layers going to the surface with the pressure in the core. And because you have this giant object and it's just made of gas, it's super fluidic. It at that point has this capacity to actually implode on itself. And as it implodes, it's trying to reach a higher state of singularity. It's devouring the remainder of the gases inside of it in order to consume itself. And as that happens, the whole thing goes supernova and explodes. But that doesn't mean when that happens that now all of a sudden you have a black hole in the center of that sun. From our standpoint, from the unified physics standpoint, that black hole, the singularity, was already there at the core of the sun. It's now just grown, and you've also now expended a lot of the lower level gases, and you've literally transmuted them alchemically into higher state metal structures. So matter is evolving in its form through this process. And as we know, supernovas are really the origin of a lot of our planetary systems, because that whole process that a sun goes through in that rebirth literally creates the carbon and the heavier metals that we need to have planetary structures like the Earth.
So that means that if there's a black hole, a supermassive black hole or singularity at the center of every galaxy, then we could actually just be on the center of a giant sun.
I'm not sure I'm going to say.
Well, like if there's a singularity at the center of all the gravitational bodies, then what about the ones that aren't? Like, what about a black hole that we can observe? That should we assume it's at the center of some sort of field or some sort of something?
Yeah, well, when you get to the scale, when you get to the scale of like galactic supermassive black holes, you're getting to a scale point where entire stars are devoured by this thing, right?
Yeah. So is there like something fundamentally different between that and the singularity at the center of the sun? Is it just scale?
The center of the sun is merging all of the energy and information the same way as the singularity at the center of the galaxy.
Ooh, so we're like the galaxy that just went supernova.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that the proton is sort of this amazing mediator, because at the scale of the proton, you basically have a little singularity, but you've got a stable geometric structure of space-time around it that's in such high tensegrity and so stable. And I keep using the word tensegrity. That's a word by Buckminster Fuller. I highly recommend checking it out if you don't know what that means, but it's a balance of push and pull, right? So it's got enough radiation and compression at the same time that it's stable. And so you look at a proton, and the way that I describe this in my work and papers, and I actually have a course on quantum geometry coming out in the Resonance Academy here in the next couple of months, is to look at a proton like a series of layers of geodesic structures. So imagine like Bucky's geodesic domes, but you've got, lots and lots and lots of layers of that. And so you've got this super highly refined crystal. And this highly, highly refined crystal is stabilized around its nuclear core, but it's a crystal made of light. So parts of that crystalline object are going into its nuclear core at the center and entering the infinite singularity, and parts of it are radiating out at its horizon, but it's in a stable sort of toroidal state of rebirthing itself, and it's spinning at the speed of light, so it's able to survive multiple lifetimes of the universe.
And is that sort of like, that's interesting, because that's kind of like, that makes me think that sort of all the stuff on the macro side of things, or the quantum side, is sort of stabilized, or the micro and the quantum side is stabilized, and the macro universal side is not stabilized. Now, I can't remember.
Not exactly, but I'll just finish what you were saying right there, and then I want you to continue. So it's more like the proton is stable at the proton level, right? If you break it apart, neutrons are not stable. Quarks are not stable. Nothing else down there is stable. The proton is pretty much the only freaking stable thing at the quantum level down at that scale, right? And then if you go all the way up, the entire universe has a level of stability. And so there's this sort of holographic relationship. And Nassim has done a lot of great work on this recently with his new cosmological constant paper, which I recommend checking out. And it's literally talking about the stabilization of a whole universe and the relationship of the entire universe's stabilization to the individual proton and the holographic relationship between them. Now, all the things in between, we've got some stuff going on.
Yeah. Is there any evidence of it's trying to stabilize?
Well, I think there is plenty of evidence in the universe that there is a sort of process of synergetics that's going on, where we actually have not just empathy, not just the process of everything going into more and more chaos, which is often the way that we perceive it, but that actually really only applies in closed systems, but a sense of syntropy, where everything is actually ordering itself at higher and higher magnitudes. Otherwise, you wouldn't get galaxies and then, solar systems and then planets and then, molecules organizing into DNA and then life evolving. And like, this is all syntropic. This is not a sign that everything is going to chaos. This is a sign that actually more information and more order is being contained within the envelope of the universe.
Yeah, because I can't remember what exactly it was that you said, but something triggered when we were speaking with Jim Alvidge, and he's a big proponent of the digital universe. But the last time we talked to him, he was talking about how there's evidence that the universe is actually trying to solve some sort of a problem. Like eventually it's going to get to a point where it solves itself out, and what happens then, we don't know. But that's,
42.
yeah, exactly. But that's kind of what took him to the point of thinking that, it's running some sort of a simulation. It's got an end game. It's all going to, however many millions or billions or trillions of years down the road, it's just a ding, done. And, some form prints out and
click. Yeah, sounds pretty reasonable to me.
So I want to get into some more of the spiritual stuff a little bit. Like you mentioned how breaking down those lenses from your past childhood type thing could help, allow this into to have different points of view and stuff like that. What about the, like you've done a lot of work in your past lives as well. I mean, I remember you talking about your past life in a stone circle, I think, sort of looking for contact or something with people. So is there also some unconscious cages that we can break down through past life work? And like, is that also a part that, that we have to get around or deal with as far as blockages go?
It's a huge factor, and it's one that most people are not accounting for very much. I didn't either. I mean, growing up, it took me until I was, several years into my kind of downloading the structure of the universe process to even consider reincarnation. And I didn't. I was just like, I don't know, maybe not. I don't know. Do I care? What should I have a reason to care? And then it actually took meeting somebody that I had a series of experiences with, where, the first time I was sitting in a college dorm room and I'm drinking a cup of coffee, and I was dating this girl, and her roommate is sitting over on her bed and talking to these two girls in college. And I'm sitting on this chair drinking my coffee and talking to these two guys. And I look over at her, and all of a sudden, I was in a medieval ballroom, and I could smell the oil burning in the oil lamps. I could feel the kind of mustiness of the tapestries hanging on the walls. I could feel the straps of my ornamental armor kind of digging into my shoulders, my ornamental sword, and I was wearing this cloak, and I'm talking with these two lords about protecting our grain trade between these lands, where we go through this valley with these trains of grain as we're like, trading goods. And they kept getting raided by brigands. And so we're literally strategizing how to, protect this grain trade. And I'm looking at her and I know she's like this woman that I love. I could feel all of this love, and she's like giggling and her hair's up, and she's got little things hanging in her hair and this elaborate dress, and she's giggling with her ladies, and I'm just like, God, I want this woman. And it's like all the feelings, all the intensity, all the physical stuff, and then all of a sudden I'm back sitting in the dorm room, and my mouth is open. I'm saying something to these two kids who to me were just medieval lords a second ago, and they're looking at me like, Adam, are you okay, man? And I was like, I need some water. So I get up, I go out in the hall, I go to the water fountain, and I like drink some water, and I go back into the room. And as I come in, I look into the bathroom, and because they had the bathrooms right by the doors in these old dorm rooms, and I see this girl, and it was my girlfriend's roommate who I'd had this vision with, and she's washing her face off, and she looks up at me, and her eyes are wide, and she was like, "Did you?" And I was like, "Oh my God, you did too?" And she's like, "Yeah." And we were both like, oh, holy crap, what do we do? I mean, here I am, I'm dating her roommate. What do? You just have this vision of somebody from like the Middle Ages. You feel all this love and all of this stuff. And, I'm just ejected from my current reality, like in the middle of a cup of coffee in an afternoon at college. What do you do with that information? And I just put it aside for a bit, because even though, I started having dreams with her, I started having other memories with her. I'd see her across campus, and all of a sudden she's a Japanese woman walking to a village with a basket behind her head. And I'm, wearing samurai armor, and I have a horse behind me, and I'm standing at the edge of the woods, and I'm feeling all the anger at her partner because I knew her husband was beating her. Like, it was just like spontaneous stuff, but I didn't know how to deal with it. And it took going to this party on Halloween, and there was a guy there who I didn't really know, and she didn't really know him well either. He was dating one of her girlfriends, and he gets super drunk, and he starts blabbing and like apologizing to me and to her for these crimes he committed to us in the Middle Ages, and uses the names that she and I had remembered faintly from having these memory experiences with each other, but hadn't told anybody. Because first of all, I don't want my girlfriend to find out that I'm having past life visions with her, her dorm mate. And he's crying and apologizing, and I felt all of it so deeply. And all the way to the memory of him and I battling in my courtyard and killing each other.
Wow.
And it was so visceral, and so intense, and so like beyond what I could, explain. But I had to start studying this. I decided, I have to look at this logically now. I need to actually understand what's going on here, because that is something that like that was proof beyond me just having some kind of fantasies about a girl, right? And at that point I started studying, and I started realizing that more and more people were coming into my life that I had connections with in other times. And I had to start dealing with that information. And as I did, and as I started to accept these things, I realized sometimes I had to deal with the pain and the hurt and the nitty gritty stuff of what I had to deal with in the past. It's not about aligning yourself to the archetype of some great being and thinking you're Alexander the Great or Cleopatra and wow, I'm just like Alexander the Great because I have a successful company. A lot of CEOs do this, but that's not the freaking point. And when you're doing that, you're connecting with an archetypal stream of a being. That's not actually direct experience. Direct experience is remembering your mom dying. Direct experience is remembering your village being burned. Direct experience is dealing with the pain and the love and the intimacy that you had with people and the relationships that you had in another life. And I started working my way through a lot of different lives and facing the really hard moments and also the blissful and beautiful ones. And I started to see how, my own concept of who I was had been very, very limited. And that who I actually am is a being that has had a much larger journey than the shy little kid, in middle school who, couldn't get a girlfriend, or like the dork in early high school that, hid at home and was a hacker, in order to just like find something interesting to do before I started waking up. And I realized that those are parts of me, but that who I am is a lot more than that. And as I started accepting all the parts of me, the good and the bad, I started realizing that I had been integrating skills from my other lifetimes since I was a little kid. I automatically had started, doing martial arts when I was very, very little. And whenever I would take martial arts classes, I often felt like the teacher was doing it wrong.
Wow.
And I would talk back to the teacher and then I'd just leave the class because like I didn't feel like they knew what they were doing. And as I got, into my late teens and into college, this woman who eventually she and I actually got together and we were partners for about 4.5 years. She gave me swords as gifts, and each sword that she gave me, whenever I put my hands around it and felt that sword, a part of me sort of instantly remembered using that sword in a specific time in a specific life.
Wow.
And suddenly the whole form of that sword, whether it was a massive Celtic two-handed sword or the precision of a katana or like the detail of a small English longsword, would move from my body. And this got me really thinking like, wow, how many times do people go to like learn things that they're excited about or that they resonate with, and they think they have to start from scratch?
Yeah.
But what if you already spent 30 years developing the skill with something? Why not reclaim that skill now?
Yeah.
And what that requires is really just being open to like, what kinds of things are there now that also you may have learned in the past, like cooking or writing calligraphy or doing sword play or gardening, farming. I mean, there's all kinds of gifts that we pass to ourselves through time. And I think they're very, very valuable and worth finding.
Wow, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, I've never thought about it in that respect with, like I thought of, I think I had one little past life regression where I was in like the year 1110 or something like that. And I had a shield, and I've always had this chronic, I had a bad elbow, and I've always thought that maybe that's from getting, beat with the shield or, beat on the shield a lot. But I never really translated that. And I've always been interested in the past life healing part, like people that heal phobias or deep issues by just acknowledging that there was a past life. They don't even have to do a lot of work around it. It's just the fact that they saw that was a problem in a past life is enough to dissolve the phobia. But I've never really thought about it in that way. Bringing something like that could be why we have phenomenal, whatever. I mean, even it might not even be the same sport or art. It could be something very similar, and all it takes is tweaking it to be, the Michael Jordan of something.
What was your thing then, you think?
Just getting beat up.
Well, I can tell you, man, getting hit with a mace while field, that hurts bad. And if you're defending somebody that you really love and care about, and whether you succeeded or failed, either way, there's an impact that's left in your body from like having this experience of like taking the beating, and that's true of so many things, like, gosh, like whether you're, there's a lot of intense stuff that can happen in a lifetime, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it's flying by. So I want to get a couple other things. I wanted to talk to you about a couple things. Maybe we can just go from there. Like your contact in the desert experience and how things have shifted in that whole community. I mean, it's such an interesting time right now. Like you mentioned, seeing, craft coming out of a couple mountains there, and the disclosures made a lot of headway lately. I mean, Bob Lazar was just on Joe Rogan, and the whole Navy pilot thing is coming out, and we've got groups all over. Like we do CE5s as a group as well, and I wanted to ask you a bit about some of our experiences and what you thought about that. But then there's also the spiritual, practical magic aspect of what you've learned with the the sacred geometry, and you mentioned it a little bit, like how a thought is a thing. So do you have any tips on putting focus thoughts or intentions into a sacred geometrical thing that can help you
Well,
be better. Do you know what I mean? Like do you
yeah,
use any of that in your meditation or your spiritual work or practical magic or
yeah, of course, of course. We can touch on that briefly because
yeah
I know you want to get
yeah
to some other really juicy stuff.
yeah.
So,
But that's
one
juicy
of the
too.
most
So
powerful methods of using geometry and consciousness to make things happen is doing vision boarding. And specifically, like, do a vision board on a giant piece of poster board, draw a circle to start with, and put what you want to create inside that circle. This is how I've manifested houses, cars, things, money when I needed it. I'd do a small circle on a piece of paper. I was like totally struggling. I had no idea how I was going to pay the rent. I'm like, I need this and I need these things in order to make this happen. And I need it within this amount of time period. And, there's lots of tricks and techniques. You can like take words in a phrase and you remove the vowels and you just use the
sigil, yeah,
consonants,
sigils,
put those
sigilizing,
consonants as
yeah,
symbols inside of a
yeah,
circle. Then, the vowels is the om, the A-E-I-O-U-M, right? And the A-E-I-O-U-M is the vibration of the feeling and the energy that you're putting through that. And so, any idea that you have, whether you put it on a piece of paper or it's in your head, is a crystal, it's a structure, it's a geometry. And that geometry or that structure is only going to be as alive as the energy that passes through it, because it's also made of light. And as you put energy through it, that's what we call emotion, energy in motion. It's the feeling that you pass through that crystal. So what does it feel like to have that house or that car or that thing, or manifest that healing experience for your family member that's hurting? What does it feel like to move through this crystal and have it be fully actualized? And then the third step is, what do you do to anchor that crystal and that feeling into matter? And this is a really, really important piece. And this piece involves the pentagram often, because that's literally the geometry of grounding. It's
mm-hmm.
literally the geometry of gravity. This is why the ancient cultures used that to call in the rain, to, make a storm, to make fertility happen. And a lot of people are really blocked at that step. And the reason they're blocked at that step is often because maybe they're Christian, and maybe going back in Christianity, they heard that the pentagram means the devil, and
Yeah,
it means that, that if you use it, you're using magic and you're evil. Well, guess what? You're basically blocking your root chakra, and you're disconnecting yourself from the process of gravitational fields and how they form matter. Like, I'm not saying anything's wrong with Christ and Christ's teachings. I'm all about it. I think
yeah,
Christ was the man. But you got to get rid of the sort of curses placed on the early Germanic tribes by the Roman Empire, because those were just created literally to disenfranchise a bunch of people, destabilize them, and then be able to take over and convert them. It wasn't because there was anything at all evil about Pan. Pan's just about sexuality and fertility and like life force energy. And when Pan became the devil, that was literally the time period where the Dark Ages started, and the plagues spread across Europe. And you start to look and you start to see these sort of connections, and it's like, well, there's some serious stuff that's gone down in the past.
yeah. Well, it's not only Christians. I mean, other people. I mean, most of us have a negative connotation with the pentagram. I mean, it's hard to it's been really sort of.
That's because we're a Christian culture.
Well,
I think.
no, I don't know. Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. So is there a difference between an upside down one and a right side up one? I mean, is there a way
not,
to?
everything is spinning.
Yeah.
Everything is
Well,
spinning.
yeah. And at
The
that
upside
level,
down pentagram, the upside down pentagram was placed with the goat head in it, right? The horns coming up, but that horned goat god or whatever that was labeled as Satan was Pan, and Pan is the pagan sort of early Germanic god
yeah,
of fertility,
right.
which creates life force, which allows people to propagate and have children. And so, well, yeah, if you don't want them to have children as much, and you want to make sexuality bad, right? You start implanting your own calendar. You start taking their sacred dates like Samhain, and you make it All Hallows Eve or Halloween. You take winter solstice, you make it Christmas. You take Ostara, you make it Easter. You know, these are just, it was co-opted. There was kind of like a thing that went down. And, you know, a lot of people don't really understand this history. And it's an important one for us to really reconcile and actually make the peace on earth that Jesus was talking about, and loving your enemies as yourself, and starting to realize and recognize that we've sort of cursed things and blamed things that really never needed to be cursed or blamed at all. And in fact, if we want to make peace, we have to start accepting that everybody has wisdom, and they're just coming from different traditions.
Yeah.
We have to love them as ourselves.
Yeah.
And the big three came from the same book, guys. So chill out. Seriously.
Exactly. So anyway, mentally heptagram,
Yeah.
emotionally hexagram, physically pentagram, mind, emotion, and body. That is how things in the universe are created. And it's there's nothing evil about that. That's just how the universe works. That's the physics of reality.
Yeah.
Tomato.
Fantastic way
It's
to-
like tomato.
No.
Except instead they took tomato and made it into fucking kill everybody else, hate. You know, they just really took a beautiful thing and turned it into a. Well, I shouldn't say that.
It's coming
I shouldn't
around.
say that. There's a lot of beautiful stuff in all the religions. There is.
Yeah, there is.
On the best side of it, but there's also a lot of terrible shit on the bad side of it. I mean, to the point of whether it's, you know, not just at the war level, there's the internal shame level, there's the it's just, let's not go down that road. Let's go down ground.
Okay,
road.
let's,
I don't want to waste the time down that
okay,
road.
tell us about your experience at Contact in the Desert. Then let's switch gears to that, because that was a great
Oh,
explanation
sure,
on
man.
the bad.
Yeah, that was a great conference. I really enjoyed it. I've heard about and known about Contact in the Desert for a very long time, because I've had a lot of friends go and speak there, and regularly be part of it, and never really went because of two things. One is usually I had stuff booked around that time, and the other is just like, you know, I've just taken care about where I go and where I take my information. And, you know, I wasn't totally sure it was like a good place for me to share, you know, my work, the balance of the science as well as the sort of metaphysics and my galactic experiences. But then I met Victoria Gavoyan, and she came and heard me talk in a giant pyramid in India at a science and spirituality festival that happens there every year, the Global Festival of Spiritual Sciences. And I did this big talk, and afterwards she came up and she was just like, "You have to come, please." So I set it aside. I set the dates aside, booked it. I'm definitely going back next year too. I had a great time. I had a great crowd. Even not being that well known within that circle, I had a great crowd in my talk. And I ended up doing like, I think 4 different talks. I did my keynote, I did a workshop, I did an intensive, and I had the deep honor of being on a panel with Graham Hancock, who's been a friend of mine, and I love Graham. He's such an amazing man. And James Gilland was on that panel too, Hanovi Strongdeer, and JJ and Desiree Hertak, which I've known for years, and they're good friends of mine too. And just absolutely love them, because Keys of Enoch was, you know, one of the first kind of spiritual books that I came across in my late teens, that when I opened it up, I was just like, oh my God, these people have cracked some codes. Like, I'm going to have to like really up my game to even understand what's in this thing. And it's, to this day, is one of my kind of most sacred books. It's an amazing book.
What was the panel on?
The panel was on, I believe, science, spirituality, and contact, something like that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. So I heard some complaints that, I mean, just a couple of a bit of censorship from there. I mean, was there any kind of, I know it's kind of like a bit of a divided community anyways, like you already mentioned, but
well, there was definitely some rocky points.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I don't ever want to speak badly about anyone.
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
and I'm not asking that either.
kind of
So
thing.
yeah.
Because I do strongly feel like, especially in this community, like we need to stick together. We need to form
Yeah.
alliances. We need to come strong. And I'll also say that I don't care how famous you are, like be clear when you're teaching. Like if you've got 1,000 people in your audience, what you say really matters.
Yeah.
So if you're just kind of rolling along and you happen to say that, you know, that you think the pyramids were created at the time of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, you know, and then you go on to talk about how all the pyramids were built prior to the Ice Age, like you're going to be causing a problem because
Right.
people are not going to understand. They're going to misplace where Nefertiti and Akhenaten are in the timeline,
Yeah.
and there's just issues with that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you know, I think there's also some challenges because you know, you have like a beautiful young guy like Jordan Sather talking on a panel with his Space Force t-shirt on, and then you know, when the conversation sort of ramps up to being like about how Trump is the best thing for disclosure, you're going to start creating divisions
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
people are, there's a lot of people who have very, very strong political feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you know, now all of a sudden you've got the audience divided and you've got half of them cheering and you've got half
Yeah.
of them
Yeah.
going, oh my
Yeah.
God, what the heck, where am I?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, we have to be cautious about these kinds of things. And I think stay focused on the mission together and stay focused on being accurate and clear. And I also would like to see a lot more women being really supported and brought forward at Contact in the Desert. There are so many amazing women speakers out there and channels,
Yeah.
and I would really like to see a much stronger contingent of the sort of female powerhouses out there at conferences like
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
just a few notes.
No,
that might
that's
be-
that. Yeah, that's very interesting. So, what do you think about? So, we go out. I mean, the CE5 thing is something we talk about on the show. We go out there, and you know, you've experienced your own sightings and stuff like that. And one of the main things that happens to us only over the last couple of years. So this kind of leads to also more of a question on disclosure too. I mean, is it already happened? Is it happening? Where's it going to go in the next couple of years? But the one thing we see fairly consistently now is pretty big flash bulbs. Like we see flash bulbs that seem to be communicating with us.
Yeah.
You know, and we've seen craft as well, low flying unidentified craft. But any thoughts on the flashbulb thing?
Well, you know, I think a lot of times when the ships are in a position where they can't really do much flybys, flash bulbs is the best way to kind of signal that they're paying attention and watching.
Yeah.
Like we did a little CE5 the first night at Contact in the Desert, and I sort of led people through a meditative experience of understanding and connecting to their Star Nation connections and lineages.
Okay.
By telling sort of some of the poetic story about some of the different species and about their ways of life and their what their planets are like. And what I find by doing this in crowds of people often is that, you know, literally I'll be lighting up different parts of the crowd because a lot of the different people there already have connections with these different star nations, and they may or may not even be conscious of it yet, right? But getting to know that sort of familial connection point allows people to open up a lot deeper. They release the fear of experiencing something that is external, that's unidentified, that's alien, that's extraterrestrial, and they start looking instead for their star family. They start looking instead for those beings out there that they already know they have a connection with. And literally as I finished up this session with these beautiful musicians, you know, and kind of was about to leave and kind of leaving people in this state of meditation, I start getting the flashes from a craft kind of moving around at different points right up here in the sky. And you know, and I think that when you're in the right kind of situation, you have the right people and the right vibe and energy together, it's a lot easier to bring in a ship down low and have much more direct contact experiences. You know, they'll do flybys and confirm questions that you're asking. They'll astrally project right down and hang out with you if you're sensitive to that kind of thing. You know, have full telepathic conversations. And it's just because, you know, really like you're dealing with like literally an interplanetary, interstellar culture that's already developed the capacity to travel faster than light,
Yeah.
which means they've already developed the capacity to travel with their consciousness.
Yeah.
So astral travel is like no big deal. Astral projection is actually required to pilot a starship faster than light, because you're definitely not using radio waves in order to like establish whether there's a ship in that location that's, 5 light years away.
Yeah.
You're not doing it. It would take 5 years or 10 years for the waves to bounce back.
Yeah.
So,
well, now you got to explain that, because I heard you articulate that, because I've always had it in my head that that might be how it works, but I've never been able to really picture it until I heard you say that.
yeah, totally. So, okay, basically, it's kind of like this. You can't travel across the galaxy and know where you're getting to unless you have some kind of information and reference point for where you're traveling to. So there's sort of a couple major approaches to this. One is to say, well, interestingly enough, if I was to somehow try to calculate my ship traveling to another point by matching the quantum frequencies of that location to create quantum coherence, so to speak, between where I'm at and this other location, then what would be the best tool I could use? Well, you'd probably say stars, because stars are these big, gigantic reference points. So if I want to travel to a certain star, I want to triangulate my position to that star at the position where that star actually is. And to some extent, technologically, I can predict, how far a star is going to travel if I've watched its motion over a certain period of time. However, the unfortunate thing about using normal stars is that even though they have a very, very specific spectral band of frequencies, what we call the sort of composition of the star or the spectral analysis of the star, those change over time because the star is burning those materials. And if the star is 400 light years away, well, it's 400 years further in its gas burning process. Or 1,000 light years away, it's 1,000 years further in that process. So they're not really great markers. But it turns out that there's something in the galaxy that does form an amazing navigation system for markers of spectral analysis, and that's pulsars. And interestingly enough, I came across Michael Salla many, many years ago, and he was doing a talk where he was telling me about this work where a gentleman was writing this book discussing that he believed that pulsars were an ancient interstellar navigation system. And I would already been thinking like, well, yeah, of course that makes sense, because pulsars have a very, very calculatable fall off of their spin rate. And we know exactly how fast it's going to pulse and exactly what its spectral analysis is going to be after 500 or 1,000 or even 10,000 years. You can predict the sort of life cycle of a pulsar much more cleanly than a normal star. So now you've got this sort of navigational beacon system all over the galaxy based on pulsars. But you still have the problem of, even if you've triangulated the position that you're going to go to, even if you've triangulated the movement of those stars over time and position, you still have to somehow get the craft from here to there. And the only way to get the craft from here to there and actually do the final check in positioning is through using consciousness. Mm-hmm. Because consciousness has this capacity of remote viewing, as has been proved over and over again by Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Group. There's been declassified files on remote viewing and made available to the public. This is not a fringe science. I mean, literally, Princeton's main engineering anomalies research group has been studying this for 20 years now. And, I've been following their work in this. And consciousness has the capacity to literally see another location, gain information about it, and relay that information back to the body. So if you want to pilot a ship, the best way to do it is to have a feedback system hooked up to your body where you are astral projecting or remote viewing another location, and you're bringing the information about that location in to your body, to what you're experiencing, and you're communicating that information to the ship. And so the ship becomes, in a sense, an extension of your own body's capacities.
Yeah. That kind of makes sense.
It's like a microphone, or not a microphone, a megaphone. It amplifies your witchiness.
I don't know. I mean, it even makes sense. Like you know, what Lazar was talking about the little seats inside the sport model in
Little
the
seats
Area
for a little guy
51.
like
You
you.
know, there's no panels. There's no nothing. It's just
fucking-
they connect. They connect to it.
You
can
jack in
project
fucking
your-
Matrix style.
Project your consciousness there. It's yeah.
Right. That's
That's
right.
what
And
that's where
I
the
mean,
probe came from. That's actually the hookup.
So it's disclose quick. So I know we're almost out of time here, but disclosure has is it happened? Is it what's going on? Is it gonna like where?
Yeah,
I mean, it's
well-
everything has changed so much in the last few years. I mean, it really is like
Definitely
it's
has.
somebody that's been into UFOs for as long as we have. It's kind of what we've always wanted to happen. You know, it's not necessarily happening in the same way, but hey, the mainstream media is taking it a little bit more seriously. You know, everybody's kind of taking it a little more seriously.
yeah, well, I think that, as Stephen likes to call it, the truth embargo has
Yep.
fallen apart. And, there when you really look at it, and I've been telling this story since 2005, 2006, that, the reality is that the reason why this information has been blocked for so long has mainly been because of fear, and it's mainly been because of misunderstanding and not lack of clarity about the information in particular. And you look at the War of the Worlds broadcast in the 1940s, and then got mass panic from people thinking that extraterrestrials are coming down, and you follow that up with Roswell.
Yeah.
So like, of course you're going to tell people it's a weather balloon. Like right after that, within a matter of a few years, are you going to go and say, yep, it was a spaceship? Like, no, people are going to freak out. And so you can see sort of this resistance structure to that kind of play out over a very long period of time. And then you've had, Rockefeller Initiative and certain things go down over time. Stephen Bassett talks a lot about the Rockefeller Initiative, Paradigm Research Group, studied it a lot, where you have sort of subtle disclosure operations happening over time. And it's, it's been obviously a staging process for a long time. And it got to the point, I think, recently where so many people are like, we know that that you guys are lying. We know that this is bullshit. Like so many people out there have seen ships. I mean, you've got like the little town in Texas that had like a giant spaceship fly over it, and like half the town saw the thing. It was like on the mainstream country news. And then of course you've got all of these disclosure people that have spoken in the Disclosure Project and the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure, and over and over and over again, pilots and astronauts and CIA and NSA and head counsel of the Iran-Contra hearing, exposing this stuff. And I would say, that's the real disclosure, is actually the people that have had direct experiences, that have been seeing this stuff for a long time, the whistleblowers, like that's where disclosure is really happening. And then the kind of the government, like the government sanctioned and approved release formula for like saying, yes, okay, so UFOs are real, but we don't know if they're from other planets. It's just kind of still trying to control the story.
Yeah. But is it getting away from him? My sense is it's getting away from him a bit.
It is, and it will continue to do so, because, lies can only stand so long without collapsing on themselves.
Yeah.
And even with the, To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, where we've seen this kind of big push come through that, look at the roster of the guys.
Yeah.
These guys are all ex-CIA, all black ops. And like, I would question what they were putting out if they're putting out definitive information, but I would encourage people to go ahead and look at it anyway, because, at least look at the fact that disclosure is happening at this scale. We can at least celebrate that, but make sure you take any definitive story with a grain of salt. And I'd say always, especially pay attention to anything that seems like fear mongering, because if it seems like they're trying to get you scared and rile you up to create some kind of defense system for the planet against extraterrestrial beings, I would be very, very concerned.
Yeah.
Because we do not need those defense systems. That time is passed a long time ago. and we have allies. We've got lots of allies supporting us in this transition, and most of the fear campaigns out there are disinformation campaigns.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that every being in the galaxy is good. That is total bullshit. Every being in the galaxy has their own nature, right? And you can't say any race is good or bad. And you also can't say any species out there is good or bad. There's bad actions and bad choices.
What about snakes?
Good choice.
We
What about
agree that
snakes?
snakes are kind of shitty. Really?
Oh, come on. Snakes are awesome, dude. Have you ever snuggled with a snake? I mean, they're just so gentle and soft, and they just kind of like slither around, and they're really sweet beings, actually.
There you go. See, Darren, you're totally wrong.
Look at his face.
Listen, the snake ruined everything. All right.
Jeez, we didn't even get to the dragons.
Dragons. You got to slay the dragon to save the princess. We're out of time. I mean, it is kind of ironic that the mainstream media came around to disclosure just as we figured out we can't trust anything they say, which is kind of frustrating. But we'll get past that.
Well, we've known that for a while, but a lot
It
of
became
people
official.
Yeah.
So we appreciate your time, Adam. I mean, Contact at the Desert was probably a lot of fun. I mean, I think we got enough Nassim ambassadors. I mean, we'll do a Contact at the Cabin with you guys one day. I mean, I've already been talking to Alan Green about it a little bit. Yeah. So we get you, Alan Green, Marshall, and Jamie.
Yeah,
and we'll go find someplace cool to hang out, and we'll make a weekend out of it.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. And Alan is epic, as you know. And if any of you guys that are listening, you missed Alan's show, you should go watch it or listen to it on Gramerica and look up the Bard code, and just watch his video, which translates patterns on the cover of Shakespeare's sonnets. He's just amazing.
Yeah.
He sent me a text.
Our other partner, Robert Grant, is also just such a brilliant man.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll have to have him on too. You should, can you put me in touch? Can you send us both an email?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Right on. Well, thanks for your time, and we'll be in touch. Absolutely. We'll do this again, and we'll be in touch for sure.
Thanks, Adam. That was great.
Enjoy the rest of your night.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you.
Okay. And we'll put links to all your work and stuff in the show notes. Make sure we'll get it. We'll get all that in there. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Right. Bye for now.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Have a great evening.
You too.
And that was a chat with Adam and Paulo.
Whew, that was great.
That was a good one.
Fantastic.
90 minutes flew by. Zing, 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 zing. As it usually does. I'm telling you, we got to get all those guys together in a cabin someplace. Just one presentation after another. We get Jamie playing the drums.
The dulcimer, the hammer dulcimer.
That's a pretty cool instrument.
Yeah, that's what it is, not the drums.
I was looking at
he probably plays the drums too.
I was looking at getting one for the studio, but
we didn't even talk about Adam's music.
It was like $1,200.
He's a DJ too. I mean, he could do. He could be DJing.
DJing what?
Electronic music.
Just DJ some shit. Yeah.
He's got a lot of free music on his website.
We should use some on the show.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I'll email and see if we can use some of his music on the show.
Yeah.
A big thanks to Adam.
Check out his website, honestly. It's fantastic. He's got training and all kinds of stuff on there. He's done some practical magic courses and doing this. I'm interested in this quantum geometry one that he's got coming up. That would be fun.
It's all triangles.
I feel like that is helpful for meditation.
I had to go back and start watching some Buckminster Fuller stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's on YouTube, must be, eh? Does he have books I can read?
I don't know.
Bucky?
Probably. Bucky Ball.
Bucky the Physics Slayer. Anyway, check out grimerica.ca/support. Support the show. We need support because without support, it all comes to a grinding halt. So keep lubing the system with your support dollars. grimerica.ca/support. Sign up for a monthly on Stripe. Then sign up for a monthly on Patreon. Then sign up for a monthly on PayPal. Or choose one or any of the above. Email
Graham at gramerica.com.
Spam Graham, Graham at Gramerica.
I'm on the Instagram. Darren's on the Twitter. Well, kind of.
Twitterish. I'm Twitterish sometimes. Seriously, though, guys, support the show. It really does help. Do all this stuff in the show notes. There's a bunch of stuff in the show notes. Join the chats. gramerica.ca/chats. Show notes shit. Review the show. Share the show. Support the show. Do all that stuff. It matters. We love you for it. And it really does make a difference. You might think $1 don't matter. $1 matters. If all you guys signed up for $1 a month, we could be doing a show a day. but 99 out of 100 you aren't willing to do that. Let's try and get that number down to 98 out of 100 of you aren't willing to do that. And maybe even one day 97. Other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
And thanks to all the live people listening.
Yeah, what's the scoop? I don't think we'll do an intro tonight, right?
No, we probably won't.
Because I think what we'll do, well, I think what we'll do is
we'll go live with the Snake Bros.
We'll go live with the Snake Bros around 9:15, 9:30.
Our time?
Central time.
Central
8:15, 8:30 Mountain time. So in about an hour and 20 minutes from now.
Yeah.
We're going to go live, do a couple hours with the Snake Bros, and I think we'll just sort of make that a whole show. We'll intro it.
Okay.
And we'll make it so that we can release that on Friday. Release the intro for our next show on
Sunday or Monday.
Saturday. We can do an intro or two.
Yeah, we'll do an intro on Saturday.
And then we'll make it so the Snake Bros show is live to tape. Drop it out.
If you want to do it that way, sure.
You have a better idea?
Nope.
Because Buddy's going to be here in like 12 minutes, and then everything's just going to pile on top of each other till midnight.
We got a couple people dropping by the studio tonight. It's a busy night.
We got
all our plans for 2 intros. We're
13 questions. We got 2 intros to do, 13 questions, a swap cast with the Snake Brothers, and 2 live person meetings.
Yeah. And the Sasquatch guy wants to come by.
Yeah, and I haven't had dinner.
We had a little bit.
We had a little.
Yeah.
We should go have some more.
All right.
All right, guys. We'll be back in an hour with the Snake Brothers. I don't know if you guys have met them yet, but they're great guys.
Fantastic people.
Okay. I'm stopping the stream. You know, zero drop frames. And we streamed at 1080 the whole